All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Thursday night book review. I'm indie author Nick Belisi. We didn't get to do our Tuesday night healing this week because I had fallen over the weekend and I managed to mess up my ribs. I have bruising on my ribs. So on Monday, because work sent me to the ER to get it checked out because I must have tweaked it when I was at work. When they did a CAT scan on me, they saw that my ribs were pretty badly bruised. So Tuesday, I was just in such a tremendous amount of pain that it was tough for me to do anything. Still in a lot of pain right now, but I'm going to power through it, and we're going to get some stuff done today because I was really excited to get into book 2 of our Thursday night review. For those of you who don't know, it's your first time joining, I'm indie author Nick Belisi, and the book we're getting into is my second book, Paradise Reborn. It's my favorite one by far. A little background to go along with it. So, this book, what I started working on when I finished the first book, I believe it was 2020. I think I actually sat down and I came up with the first prologue and maybe the first page or two of the first chapter. Nothing crazy. And then I took a break from it. But once I got, which actually happened to be a year ago this week, when I got my first book published, that's when I decided to realize that this isn't just a dream anymore. Like, this is something that I can make into a reality. So then I really started hammering this out. And what wound up happening was that I think I managed to get half of the first chapter done. And then in talking with Stormy and stuff like that, it gave me motivation to keep pushing through. And every Thursday I would read to her what I got done, or if we were lucky enough that I got more than a chapter done in a week, we would read numerous times in a week. Then it turned into I was able to knock out 2 chapters at a clip. So every Thursday what we wound up doing is I would sit there and I would read to her, the chapters that I had done. So she was a huge part in this book, and I definitely dedicated this book to her because she was just with me the whole ride and giving me all the insight and stuff that she thought, the direction that the book was going and stuff. So, a big shout out to her for being along that ride. And like I said, it's absolutely 100% dedicated to her in specific. Now, before we go into this, as it states in the book, which I'm just going to read real quick, just so everybody understands going forward, and before you read the book, if you happen to pick it up. This book deals with a lot of difficult subjects, for sure. Okay? So, with that being said, there are trigger warnings. So, I'd just like to go over them right now before we get into it. Okay? This book contains certain themes that may not be suitable for specific audiences. This book deals with specific topics on mental health, self-harm, alcoholism, drug abuse, suicide, and sexual assault. So please be mindful of these and other possible triggers and seek assistance if you're needed from the resources that I've listed below. For anyone who's suffering from any type of these things, please know that there is help. Now, the reason I have that in there, I also have the suicide hotline, the substance abuse and mental health services, and the National Sex Assault Hotline. It does deal with some extreme themes, this book. So I just wanted to give that trigger warning before we really, got into this in case anybody was struggling, and feel free to log off if it's something that pops up and bothers you in any way, shape, or form. So what I'm going to do to get us kicked off, I'm going to read the prologue. It's only 5 pages, so it's not terribly long, but I do want to read it just to give you the insight of how the book begins, and maybe it'll interest you to check it out. So again, the book is called Paradise Reborn. And it begins with, helplessly I cling to life as a thickening smoke surrounds my entire body. I can't seem to make anything out before me other than my childhood home engulfed in flames. The thick smoke filling my lungs with each breath I take, snuffing out the pleas for help I try to muster up. I fall hard to my knees, fanning the smoke away from my face as I move towards my home. There's a presence pulling me towards the home despite the danger laid out before me. I feel as if I'm dragging a mountain behind me as each step I take is met with increasing resistance from my body. Despite my body's protesting to give in to all the smoke, I continue to press on. I am now approaching the walkway leading to the front door. The heat radiating off of the burning structure is so intense it almost singes my eyelashes. My vision becomes a little more stable, panning over my home looking for some sort of sign. The glass from the upstairs window shatters outward into my direction as the flames combust into the night sky. No sooner than the bits of glass had landed around me like a sudden rainfall did I begin to hear screaming. I couldn't distinctively tell where they were coming from, but I knew they were inside. I must be insane to think that there's going to be some way for me to get in there as my mind began to accept the utterly helpless feeling. Still fanning the smoke from my eyes, I tried to narrow down where the constant screams were coming from. The fire raging on had now consumed the whole roof as pieces of debris fell around me. I tried to yell out, but my words were muffled and strained from the vigorous coughing that had accompanied them. The solid wood front door before me began to slowly open just enough to where I could see a set of hands gradually sticking out above the door handle. They kept reaching out, and I quickly pinpointed where the screams were coming from. There's someone trying to get out, and they need my help. I cautiously approached the door, never taking my eyes off the fire above my head. I knew at any moment the whole house could come crashing down like a tower of cards, and if I wasn't away from it quick enough, I'd never be able to escape. I go to pull on the door and burn myself on the handle. Stupidly, I didn't think about how hot the metal door handle would be, leaving my hand to pay the price for another one of my mistakes. The hands in front of me, severely charred, slowly began to recede back behind the door. I aggressively started pounding on the door, trying to show the hands behind it that there was hope and they just needed to hang on a bit longer. The screaming had stopped, and it seemed as if the tortured victim had finally succumbed to the fiery wrath. My tears flooding down my face, mingled with the dark smoke, gave me the appearance of crying trails of black as I glanced towards my reflection in the door window. I felt so helpless and weak, clutching my waist as I backed away from the door. I could do nothing to save this person, and I could never do anything right in my life. My body lost its only vice to cling on as I slowly plummeted into the grass beneath me. What was the point of all this? No sooner than that question completed itself within my mind did I hear a voice calling out to me. The voice sounded so familiar to me, immediately catching my full attention. Before me, a burned figure levitating a few feet above the ground, seemingly froze in time, cast out a massive blast, clearing all the smoke from my surroundings. I slowly began to rise to my feet, keeping the figure in my sights. It hadn't made a single movement, but I could hear a low whisper coming from behind its still lips. I tried to listen closely, but I could not quite hear what it was saying. I began to cautiously meander over to the figure, as I had no idea what was going on and didn't want to put myself in any danger. Now standing just a foot away from the figure, I leaned in to hear what it was saying. "You should have saved me." To which I responded, "Who are you?" Nothing but silence came from the figure. There were no distinct features to it, and from the burns I couldn't even possibly identify whether it was male or female. The pain this person must have endured, how could they even be before me, was so puzzling. There's no way this could be real. This must be some sort of a dream. I went to move in closer, trying to convince myself this was something I was imagining, when the figure grabbed my upper arms, paralyzing me from the pressure. My legs fell weak, and it held me slightly above the ground by my arms. Overcome with fear, I looked straight at where its eyes would have been located, and I fell locked into a shock-filled trance. The face came within inches of my own face and whispered out, "Mommy's little angel, ripe for the pickings." The burned figure cast my body towards the ground, releasing its death grip from my arms. The ground below me had disappeared as I began free-falling into complete darkness. As I fell helplessly into oblivion, I could hear the figure screaming out with laughter. There was no sound around me as I fell for what felt like eternity, my mind racing with nothing in sight other than the dwindling light from above. I squeezed my hands against my head as an overwhelming panic set in and screamed out for anyone to help me. So that is the prologue, and it basically just gives you a sense of what's going on with Gwen and where she's at with all this stuff. So you're not supposed to know what's going on. It's just the introduction to the story. Now, I said each week we'll probably do about one chapter. So this week's chapter is going to be the very first chapter, and it's called Shattered Memories. This book is a lot more vast than the first book. So with that being said, you know what I mean? It's more than double, sometimes triple the chapter sizes and stuff like that. So it's hard to really sit there and be able to, you know, spend a lot of time going through the Easter eggs and all that stuff. But basically what we're going to do is we'll probably do one chapter a week. And when we do that one chapter a week, you know, I'll go into all the Easter eggs, tell you guys what's going on in the chapter and stuff like that. So in this chapter, it's called Shattered Memories. And basically what happens is Gwen wakes up at this point. That was all a dream. She wakes up from her nightmare to find herself in like her hotel room that she had checked into the night before. she just starts reminiscing of how she became to be there. She's wondering, was this like another drunk-filled night? Like, is that how I wound up here? Or, is there something more to it? So as she gets up, she goes to clean herself up, and she goes into the bathroom. When she goes into the bathroom, she's washing herself up, putting water in her face and stuff, and she realizes that there's like a burn on her hand and stuff. So it worries her that, well, maybe this was real. Like, how did this happen? How is this going on? So she begins to panic, and as the panic sets in, she's having an overwhelming panic attack. And what she does is she reaches down, she takes a drink of the vodka she had sitting there, and tries to like even out a little bit. While she's gathering herself, she starts to think about, why that nightmare in particular happened. So she talks about her parents dying and stuff like that, because when she was 14 years old, she was sleeping over her best friend Stacy's house, who happened to be across the street from her parents' house. And during that sleepover, she's staying there, and she wakes up in the middle of the night in like a panic, and she doesn't know why. And she happens to catch a glimmer of light out the window. And that glimmer of light, when she goes to investigate it, she sees that her childhood home is on fire. So she quickly wakes Stacy up and then tells her to get her parents as she dashes down the stairs and heads across the street. When she gets across the street, there's nothing she can do. She just feels utterly hopeless and helpless. Like she's falling apart. Like she knew like her parents were home and stuff like that. So she goes there. So the police wind up showing up, and Stacy's kind of like consoling her and stuff. And the police start talking, and, Gwen's just so out of it. She's just completely out of it at this point, which, by the way, if you've been keeping up with us, probably should have mentioned that. Stella was our main character in the first book, but she's not the main character in this book. This book follows the story of a girl named Gwen Murphy, which we will get into, but I just wanted to throw that out there so you know who I'm talking about. So Gwen's she's going through the motions and stuff like that, crying in Stacy's arms, and then what winds up happening is she overhears the police asking Stacy's parents, does this girl have somewhere to go? Like, both her parents passed away in this fire. So they say, we don't know of any family she has other than them, so we'll take her in for now, and we'll get that all figured out. She's got a lot going on as it is, so let's not put the extra pressure on her at this point. So she's going to go stay with them. And she winds up staying with them for like 2 years. So she's 16 now at this point. And, she's coming into it. She's very close with Stacy. That's her best friend. They share everything together. They're just real tight. And one day when Gwen comes home from school, she noticed that, again, this is where the trigger warnings are going to set in. But she notices where Gwen's father, I guess, started to take an interest in her and stuff like that. As she was growing up, he started making more, I guess, sexually suggestive remarks and stuff like that towards her, and made her feel uncomfortable. And, she tried not to think so much of it. And then one night he snuck into her room, and he was doing things to himself in her presence. And, that at that point, it shocked her. She felt so disgusting. She felt so violated. Although he didn't do anything to her, it was happening right in front of her. But she just felt so violated. She didn't know how to handle it. She just felt alone in all of it. So the next day when she's going to school and stuff like that, she's going to talk, or Stacy's like asking her, what's going on with you? You're not normally like this. Like, why are you so reserved and quiet? But Gwen doesn't want to say anything. And she feels that even if she did say something to Stacy, Stacy probably wouldn't believe her that happened. So she just kept to herself. The hours turned to minutes, or the minutes turned to hours, kind of deal. Time's just fleeting her as she's just trying to make it through school. And when she's going home, she feels so uncomfortable with the situation that she just bypasses dinner, goes right up to her room. She's working on her homework and stuff. Stacy comes up and talks to her and says, hey, you're going to come down for dinner? And she's like, I'm really not feeling well. I'm just going to stay up here, and I'm going to get some sleep. So, they brush it off. She's going to lay down. But then again that night, Stacy's father sneaks into her room, and this time he actually does sexually assault Gwen. And when he does that, it absolutely destroys Gwen. I'm not going to get into it, and I'll explain why when I'm done talking about it, but it absolutely destroys her. And she winds up, like, when he finally leaves, she's feeling so sick and torn and destroyed. She goes in the bathroom. She doesn't even recognize the person she sees in the mirror anymore, but, she goes into the shower to clean herself, and she winds up crying to herself in the shower and falling asleep there. To be woken up the next morning by Stacy, who's saying, hey, like, are you okay in there? What's going on? She wakes herself up. She tells Stacy, yeah, I'll be down in a minute. She gets herself ready. They know it's another school day. She heads downstairs, and George is smugly sitting at the table, you know, basically relishing in all the pain and stuff like that that he has caused people. So, you know, Gwen's trying her best to keep it together at this point. She's trying so unbelievably hard. And he's just being like a smug prick and just rubbing in her face that, like, I took advantage of you and there's nothing you can do about it. So, you know, Gwen's just looking at her food and she can't imagine anything other than, like, disgust. Like, even the smell of, like, the delicious food in front of her just is, like, fleeting from her because, you know, of what happened. So George is rubbing in her face, oh, like, you have to eat and stuff like that. And just like a child, she's just, like, moving her food around her plate. She's just trying to, like, bide time until Stacy's ready. Once Stacy's ready, they finally leave school. But on the way, Stacy knows something's wrong. So she brings it up to Gwen, like, hey, what's going on with you? Like, you need to start talking to me. What the hell is going on? And Gwen, not meaning to, but so enraged with what happened to her and not being able to talk to Stacy about it, as a fear that Stacy might abandon her and not want to be her friend anymore, or even believe her for that matter. She kind of, like, blows up at Stacy and they go separate ways. So Stacy goes to school. Gwen has no idea where the hell she's going, so she just heads right back to Stacy's house. And when she goes inside, she sees Mrs. Hubbard in there, and she's like, you know, what are you doing here? And Gwen just makes up a quick story. She's like, you know, I forgot a book upstairs. I'm just going to grab it, and then I'll be on my way. But when she goes upstairs, she's like, I can't be here anymore. If I stay here, what's going to wind up happening is that they're going to take advantage of me. Like, this is going to happen again. It's going to keep repeating itself. It's going to keep getting worse. I need to get the hell out of here. So she quickly just grabs her backpack with, like, a little bit of stuff and heads out the house. No idea where she's going to go or anything like that. She just starts heading to downtown Reedsville. Now, from where they live to downtown Reedsville, it's maybe a little more than a mile from the residential area of it into the downtown scene where, like, the little shops and stuff are. And when she gets down there, she goes to the general store. Now, the Reedsville General Store, if you followed along with us, is a big part in actually all the 3 books. You know, that's where Pete's family owns it and stuff like that, and where most people go to get, like, their breakfast sandwiches, their food, all that stuff. You know, that's where that all happens. So she finds herself there. But because this is years before, many years before the first book, you know, this reminiscing, Pete isn't the one that owns it at this point. It's his father, Alberto. So when she goes in there, she gets herself a soda. She talks to Alberto. Alberto's, you know, asking, like, hey, like, why aren't you in school and stuff? So she explains, like, oh, I'm going. I just stopped here real quick. So she goes to leave, and when she leaves, she notices, because across the street from the general store, if you remember from the first book, is a bus stop. So when she sees it, she sees that there's a bus sitting there, and the idea just pops in her head, just like, this is it. This is how I'm going to get the hell out of here. So she runs across there, and the lunch money she had from Mrs. Hubbard for the week that she had left over, because she really wasn't eating, she took it, bought a bus ticket, and she's gone. And that's how chapter 1 ended. Now, the Easter eggs that go along with this, and the stuff that I was going to explain. So Shattered Memories is the name of the title. The reason why I came up with that is actually 2 reasons. One, she's talking about how her memories were shattered and stuff like that, and how she was destroyed at such a young age, and she's reminiscing. It's to give you an idea of who the character is and how she got to where she is. So obviously those are her shattered memories. It's also a nod to my favorite Silent Hill game, which is also of the same title, Silent Hill Shattered Memories. Between that and Silent Hill 3, but I like the storyline of Shattered Memories just a little bit more, because if you've played it, you kind of determine what's going to happen based on the things you do within the game. Just like it is with Gwen, she determined what was going to happen with her life by the things that happened to her in her life. So that was just a nod to that, and that's why that was there. Now, she talks about what I said before. When she comes back from the nightmare, she's talking about drinking in her hotel room and stuff like that. That's actually a reference to something from my own life. When I was getting out of the Navy and I had 2 months left before I actually left, they told me that I was getting out, but I didn't realize it was going to get postponed. So I had given up my apartment that I had out in San Diego, California, and I thought, okay, within a week I'll be out of here. So I just was like, okay, I'll stay in a hotel room and stuff for like a week and whatever. That week wound up turning into 2 months, you know, while they got me processed and all that stuff and got all their X's, you know, done. And I actually was, you know, out. So I wound up living in a hotel sometimes in my car. It was just like back and forth. But a lot of this book, you know, because I didn't have a home at that point in time, because I couldn't live on base, you know, while I was going through all that stuff, because technically I was married and I had taken that marriage money, so like I was supposed to live off base. But it wasn't worth pursuing getting a home or a hotel, or not a hotel, an apartment, because I didn't know when I was going to be leaving. You know, they kept telling me, oh, next week, next week, next week. And it just kept turning and turning and turning, and it kept going, and wound up being 2 months. So when I could get a room booked, I would stay in a hotel. And when I couldn't, I would just stay, I would just stay in my car at that point. So there was actually a couple times where I went to Balboa Park and I just crashed on a bench out there too. So a lot of the book, which we'll get into the next chapter about Gwen's life currently, is based off of that point in time in my life. So when I was referring to Gwen drinking in the hotel room and stuff like that, that's what I was doing. It's because I was miserable. I wanted to get out. I was ready to go. You know, I got honorably discharged and everything. I didn't do anything wrong. But, you know, just that whole time of waiting and waiting and waiting, all I did was start getting into drinking. And I was getting into it pretty heavy. At that point, I was drinking about a bottle of Stoli a day. And I was using Green Monster to chase it. That was like my thing when I did it. So that reference in there was from basically what my routine was. At that point in my life, you're talking 11 years ago, I would wake up, drink a bottle of, like, start drinking Stoli, chase it with a Green Monster. That's why I threw it in the book. Now, I got asked when I got interviewed a couple times now about what was the hardest scene to write in all of my books. It's definitely that scene that I talked about before that I said I wasn't going to really dive into, about how Gwen gets assaulted and stuff like that. I didn't want to write about it. I didn't feel comfortable writing about it and stuff like that, but I knew that that was going to be the thing that thrusted Gwen forward and ultimately plays out later in the story as to why it's so important. You know, it took a while for me to write that. I knew the direction of what I wanted to do it, but actually sitting there and describing it, I felt like gross doing it, but I knew it had to be done for the sake of the book. So I did that and, you know, got through it, and it really, you know, I'm sure anyone who's read it will tell you, it's a pivotal moment in the story because it's what inevitably got Gwen to leave Reedsville. That's why she left, because she didn't want to be succumbing to any more of that type of abuse. That night after it's done, when she's lying on the shower floor, and she's basically like crying out for her mom and stuff like that because she doesn't know what the hell's going on, and like she just feels so alone. That was from another thing that I had done in my life. I had found myself one night doing the same exact thing because of some difficulties that I was having in my life. Again, a lot of this story was taken from the context of when I was getting out of the Navy into my divorce. Like, all of that, like, sadness and stuff like that, where I molded this book from, comes from that point in time. So basically, like, midway through 2012 to about the end of 2012, beginning of 2013. So, I was feeling it. I was going through all of it. So it made it a lot easier to write about, you know, from Gwen's perspective. Because as I've said in my numerous things that we've done, all of the characters are different variations of myself at different things that I experienced in life, just obviously twisted, you know, for a storyline. But a lot of the things come from that. And that's where these Easter egg videos that I've come up with doing, I can explain why they did that, where those ideas came from and stuff like that. So, like, Gwen's pain and stuff like that came from the pain that I was feeling as I was getting out of the service. So that whole scene and stuff like that, when she's looking in the mirror and doesn't even recognize who she is anymore, that's how I was seeing myself when I was drinking a lot and I didn't want to be in the Navy anymore, and I was just depressed. I was going through a divorce. Like, it was a really, really hard time. I didn't know if I was going to be sleeping in my car or here or there or whatever. It was just tough. So my only goal in mind was to get home, everything will be better, go back to New Jersey, figure it out. So that's where that comes from. Now, on a positive flip, this is where the first and only time actually that we meet Alberto Celli, and that's Pete's father. Because you got to imagine Gwen's only 16 at this time, and it's only shortly after that, a couple years later, I think about 5 years later. Yeah, 5 years later is when Pete is fully running it, Alberto's out and stuff like that, because unfortunately he does pass away. But it's not a huge thing in the story, but we will talk about that later on in one of the chapters. Pete mentions it. You also get your first glimpse of what Pete was like back then, because you got to think Pete was in his mid-20s, I believe, back when this originally was taking place, this memory. So he's doing his typical Pete thing. He's hanging out in the back of the store. He's watching the soccer game. He's screaming his head off and stuff like that. Just typical Pete. So it's just, for anyone that read the first book, it's like a nod back to you, like, oh, like Pete, because he is a lot of people's favorite character, including, he's one of my favorite characters as well. So it's just a nod in that regard to bring him back into it, explain what the scene's like in this point in time, and kind of see what Gwen thinks and stuff. So she did go to Reedsville High School, also with Stella. So they were not in the same class. Gwen is actually 2 years younger than Stella. So she was actually in the same grade as Stella's sister, Cecile, which will be brought up in the next few chapters as well. But again, Gwen left, hit the road, and didn't care where she was going. She was just getting the hell out of there. And when we go into the next part of it, like I said, I can guarantee I can get 1 chapter done per week. I will try for 2. It really just depends on scheduling. But our next chapter is called Seductive Solitude. And I mean, that chapter in itself is almost 30 pages long. So to go through it, write down how my Easter eggs, all that stuff, it is a little time consuming. But I will try my best to get another one. But if not, we will just stick with the 1. Now, like I said, this was just the introduction and everything. It was just about the first chapter and the prologue and everything, just to get you guys interested. If I did happen to catch your attention and you did like what you heard and are interested in hearing what the story is going on, if you don't want to wait for me to describe it, you could certainly, as Stormy posted earlier, you can certainly jump on Amazon. It is 99 cents for the Kindle version for both books to get caught up. And then it's also a little bit more money if you want the hardcover, but that's because of printing costs and whatnot. But now, each week, like I said, for anyone that's not familiar with it, each week on Tuesdays we do our healing. Thursdays we do our book review. So next Thursday we'll definitely do chapter 2. Maybe chapter 3, I can't make promises, but definitely we will be doing chapter 2. Like I said earlier in the video, I fell over the weekend and I badly bruised my ribs, so I'm kind of like fighting through that right now. It's probably why I seem so out of it. It's just extremely painful, but I'm fighting through it. I couldn't make Tuesday's thing just because it was so unbelievably painful. However, we postponed it till next Tuesday on Halloween. That's when we will be doing toxic relationships. That's also when I'm going to be posting the next 3 videos that we're going to be doing. I'll post it that night to give you guys something to look forward to as the weeks move on and stuff. If you haven't seen any of our Tuesday night healings and you're interested about them, you can go on our YouTube channel, The Paradise Collection, which is also, there's a link on my TikTok page. Just click the little YouTube button. All of our prior stuff is on there. So our last 10 book review, or our last 9 book reviews, this one will eventually be on it too. And then our other 8 healings, obviously we'll get to number 9 when we do Tuesdays. But you can always check them out. We always invite people, if you have any ideas as far as what you want to be talked about and stuff. We do have a schedule pushed out like 3 weeks right now, actually about a month, of things that we're going to be doing. But, we would love to throw that in there, on our list of things to go over and things to do. If you want to jump on and talk about these things too, we always invite people to jump on and give their input on certain things as well. Same thing with all my book talk people. If you want to jump on and you want to have a chat, introduce your book, talk about my book, get it going, talk about what it's like to be an indie author, the struggles you're having, the struggles I'm having, maybe we help each other out with different, advice and stuff like that. I'm always looking forward to doing things like that. Just reach out to me or to Stormy, and we will certainly set that up and make that happen. With that being said, that's all I have for tonight. It was just a quick opener and stuff like that. Not a whole lot of Easter eggs in the very, very beginning of the book. But as we go through, I'm telling you, there's so many. Just even trying to reread it myself and stuff like that and go through it, it's a lot. There's going to be a lot to talk about. But again, this was just the introduction. So if you want to check it out and get ahead of me and stuff like that to know what's going on, certainly look into that. But if not, then we will go through this each week and you can certainly follow along. And, I love the feedback. I love hearing when you guys message me. I've gotten a lot of messages actually recently on direct messages on TikTok about how you guys like the book and stuff. And, I really appreciate that. I do. All the Amazon reviews, it's incredible. It's truly a humbling thing to see how much you guys have enjoyed it so far. I am working on book 3. I am on the 5th chapter right now. I'm out of work for an entire week, so I'm just trying to rest up right now and get myself healed before I dive into it. So there's going to be a little bit of a pause, but I'll probably be picking it back up Monday as long as everything's headed in the right direction. So, and then once I get done with chapter 5, we're going to do a little sneak peek and stuff for all you guys that have been following along. You know, you can get a taste of where we're at with the book. So, with that being said, that's everything I have for tonight. Thank you guys so much for listening to me rant. I hope you check out the books. Like I said, if you want to get caught up, jump on our YouTube and check that out. And I will see you guys next Tuesday for Toxic Relationships.